Hockey is a sport of giants, but every once in a while, someone comes along and changes the game forever. Theo Fleury was that player, a fiery, fearless competitor who defied the odds, thrilling fans with his electric play and relentless spirit. But while he was dazzling on the ice, his life off it was a battle against demons far more dangerous than any opponent he faced in the NHL. This is the remarkable, heartbreaking, and ultimately inspiring story of Theo Fleury, his rise to stardom, his fall into chaos, and his journey to redemption. Theron Wallace Fleury was born on June 29, 1968, in Oxbow, Saskatchewan, but for all the wide open spaces of the Canadian prairies, his childhood felt suffocating. He spoke openly later in life about how he was raised in chaos. A household dominated by a father who struggled with alcoholism and a mother haunted by prescription pill dependency. According to Theo, he was the one forced to be the adult in the family before he even knew what that truly meant. Picture a little kid, too small to begin with, barely out of toddlerhood, tiptoeing around to avoid sparking tension between a mother and father who were frequently lost in their own destructive coping mechanisms. He learned early how to read the emotional temperature in a room, always bracing for the next storm. In that environment, fear was a constant companion. By his own account, he grew up perpetually on edge, always waiting for another blow-up, never able to find relief. No wonder he gravitated to hockey. It was the perfect outlet. A place where he could channel fury, frustration, and fear into aggression, speed, and a surprisingly tenacious style of play for someone considered so diminutive. His family moved to Russell, a small town in Manitoba, which is where Theo's legend at the local rinks really started to form. Even in the early years, you could see glimpses of the unstoppable athlete he would become. While other kids were shooting pucks for fun, he was doing it to survive, at least emotionally. He discovered that when you lace up your skates and step onto that frozen sheet, there's nothing else but the game. All the tension from home, all the swirling anxiety, all the confusion and heartbreak and anger could be left behind. The result was a style of hockey that was gritty, electric, and relentless. People in that small community recognized his potential. In fact, they believed in him so much that the townspeople actually raised money to send Theo to a prestigious hockey program, the Andy Murray Hockey School in Brandon, Manitoba. That move was a testament to how special his talent was. It's not every day an entire community rallies around a teenage hockey player. But that's how much they saw in this undersized forward who never took a shift off. But it was also at this time that Theo met a figure who would cast a terrifying shadow over much of his young life. Graham James, a scout for the Winnipeg Warriors of the Western Hockey League, took an interest in the energetic Fleury. James told him that it didn't matter if he was a scrawny 5'2", 120-pound teenager. His skill was enough to get him to the NHL. Think about how that must have sounded to a kid who'd been overlooked by so many adults, whose home life was chaotic and insecure. He latched onto James's words with the desperation and hope of someone who sees a door to a better life. James convinced Fleury's parents that if Theo wanted to pursue hockey as a serious career, moving in with him in Winnipeg would be the best option. Theo was just 14 years old, and his parents, seeing a chance for him to escape small-town life and a household that was never stable, agreed to let him go. It was a decision that would shape the rest of Theo's life in both wonderful and horrifying ways. What no one realized at the time was that this living arrangement would lead to an unspeakable betrayal. Between the ages of 14 and 16, Theo says he was repeatedly abused by Graham James. Imagine the psychological whiplash. You're a teenager who has pinned your dreams to this mentor, living far from your family, trusting this adult to guide you into a professional career, and suddenly you're trapped in a nightmare. According to Fleury, this abuse happened over 100 times. He was left traumatized, sleepless, and absolutely alone with a secret he felt he could never reveal. In the conservative world of hockey in the 1980s, there was little conversation about mental health, and even less about exploitation. To cope, he found a companion that would follow him for decades: alcohol. By 16, he had begun drinking heavily, seeing it as something he needed just to get by, as vital as oxygen. And it's not hard to grasp why, when you're that young, living with unspeakable trauma, you do whatever you must to survive another day. Still, the talent was there, and it shone through even during the darkest times. Theo carved out a path in junior hockey, starting with the St. James Canadians in the Manitoba Junior Hockey League when he was only 15. The following season, he joined the Moose Jaw Warriors of the Western Hockey League, once again under Graham James, and continued to light up the ice. But the scoreboard couldn't erase the pain off it. Struggling in secret, drowning his trauma in booze, he nonetheless managed to rack up impressive stats year after year. By his final junior season, he was unstoppable: 68 goals, 92 assists, and 235 penalty minutes in 1987-88. That was the same year he tied Joe Sakic for the WHL scoring title, proof that his offensive wizardry was no fluke. At the same time, you saw the signature feistiness in the form of those hefty penalty minutes. He was small, yes, but he was never going to be a pushover, not on the ice at least. Off the ice, he learned that adult responsibilities arrive whether you're ready or not. He fathered a son with his high school girlfriend, Shannon, during his final junior season, which added another layer of complexity to an already complicated life. Moose Jaw held a special night to honor his achievements, retiring his jersey, celebrating his record-shattering stats. In a bittersweet twist, Theo would later question how many of those praising him that night knew about the monstrosities behind closed doors, about the abuse, and whether some of them had chosen to remain silent. Theo also made a name for himself on the international stage when he represented Canada twice at the World Junior Championships. One instance in particular etched his name into hockey lore: the punch-up in Piestany in 1987, where Canada and the Soviet Union were involved in a notorious bench-clearing brawl that got both teams ejected from the tournament. That fiasco might have overshadowed the performance of many, but not Fleury. He remained the same intense, fearless competitor, hitting, scoring, and stirring trouble whenever he jumped the boards. In 1988, he redeemed that previous fiasco by captaining Team Canada to a gold medal in the next World Juniors. Despite these accolades, however, NHL scouts seemed to look right past him. In 1986, the league still had 12 rounds in its draft, and not a single team selected him. Think about that for a moment. The kid who would eventually become an NHL legend was so thoroughly dismissed that not one team in a 12-round draft took a chance on him. Being overlooked just added more fuel to Fleury's fire. He was determined to prove people wrong, to shove his success in the faces of those who believed he was too small. The Calgary Flames eventually showed some foresight. In 1987, after another year of growth, literally and figuratively, they took Fleury 166th overall, in the 8th round. There's a famous story about their scouting director throwing his pen in disgust and calling Fleury a jockey. The Philadelphia Flyers front office reportedly laughed out loud when they heard his name picked. That's how convinced the establishment was that a 5'6" dynamo couldn't last in the brutal, clutch-and-grab style of 1980s NHL. As we now know, Fleury would make all those doubters choke on their laughter. When he joined the Flames for training camp, it was as if he had something to prove every single shift. He was relentless. He didn't just slip around defenders, he barreled through them, fearlessly going into corners, taking and giving hits, weaving in and out like a wrecking ball on skates. Yet, for all his determination, he arrived to that camp 20 pounds overweight. The Flames sent him down to their affiliate in Salt Lake City, and there he absolutely torched the International Hockey League. It was as if he had become unstoppable, piling up goals, making plays, and showing everyone that the only reason he was in the minors at all was to shed those extra pounds. Eventually, the Flames called him up on New Year's Day 1989. And he immediately began piling up points, 34 in 36 games. That spring, Calgary hoisted the Stanley Cup for the first time in franchise history, and Fleury, still technically a rookie, contributed 11 points in the playoff run. Picture a 5'6" spark plug flying around in the Stanley Cup Finals, brimming with confidence, unstoppable in spirit. He'd proven everyone wrong. He was a champion. Champion or not, old habits die hard. With success came money, and with money came the chance to indulge in ways that a traumatized, rebellious, and newly famous athlete is bound to. Fleury partied and partied hard. He attracted women, he spent lavishly, and he found himself swirling in a fast, frantic lifestyle that offered plenty of ways to hide from the nightmares in his head. Yet he kept improving on the ice. By 1991, he had a 51-goal season, racking up 104 points and making the All-Star team while tying for the league lead in plus-minus at an astonishing +48. Fans went wild for this pint-sized gladiator, and it seemed nothing could slow him down. A moment that remains iconic in Calgary Flames history is Fleury's OT winner against the rival Edmonton Oilers in the 1991 playoffs. It's that famous celebration, him sprinting across the ice, punching the air, a swirl of euphoria and defiance. But behind the scenes, the storm was growing. He was struggling with knee issues, among other injuries, yet insisted on playing. Pain, both physical and psychological, was a friend he'd grown used to. And if something hurt, there was always a quick fix. Maybe it was a drink, maybe it was something else. The flamboyance on the ice was matched by a temper that flared unpredictably. He played on the edge, as he would say, and it took him right up to the boundary of self-control. Sometimes, he stepped over it. You could see it in the high penalty minutes, the scrums, the vendettas, the heated arguments with opponents and referees. You could also see it in his off-ice antics, where he gravitated towards chaos. Those close to him sometimes tried to intervene, but it was as though he needed that danger to sustain his adrenaline. Deeper down, of course, it was a frantic attempt to manage the trauma he still hadn't fully confronted. Strangely enough, in 1994, Fleury crossed paths again with Graham James, the same man he longed to forget. During the lockout that year, Theo had played briefly in Finland, but upon returning to North America, James approached him to invest in a new junior hockey franchise in Calgary. The group included big names like Joe Sakic, Bret the Hitman Hart from the world of professional wrestling, and others. Theo quickly signed on to be the biggest investor, contributing $125,000 to help establish the Calgary Hitmen. It's mind-boggling how James was able to regain a presence in Fleury's life after the abuse, yet the complexities of trauma are never straightforward. It can create a twisted sense of loyalty, a bit like Stockholm Syndrome, where the abused person still feels some bizarre duty to their abuser. Years later, critics would slam Fleury for enabling James to be around young players. But at that time, Theo himself was still deep in his own darkness, not fully acknowledging how that horrific chapter had shaped him. Meanwhile, he was continuing to rack up numbers for the Flames, becoming the team's captain in a period that was less than stellar for the franchise. Calgary had begun to decline from their late 80s heights, but Fleury remained a bright spot, a spark who could will his team into contention on any given night. Yet away from the ice, he was a ticking time bomb. He was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at one point, suffering intense abdominal pain. It only added to the swirl of problems in his personal life, and though he kept playing through it, demonstrating a nearly superhuman tolerance for adversity, his emotional demons were accelerating. In 1996, his close friend Sheldon Kennedy pressed charges against Graham James for sexual abuse dating back to their time in junior. Rumors immediately sprouted that another big-name player had also been victimized, but Sheldon never named names. The media, hungry for a salacious story, hounded Theo, bombarding him with questions about whether he was that unnamed player. Fearing the catastrophic fallout from acknowledging the truth publicly, Fleury tried to distance himself from the rumors. The pressure, however, was relentless, and he escalated his drinking and other destructive behaviors to cope. Through it all, he still performed spectacularly, setting franchise records and becoming the Flames' all-time leading goal scorer, surpassing legends like Joe Nowendick and even Al MacInnis in points. He was unstoppable on the ice and spiraling off it. When the 1998 Winter Olympics came around in Nagano, Fleury was named to Team Canada. The entire nation waited anxiously for a gold medal, but the team ended up without a medal at all. For Fleury personally, the experience revealed how deeply his addictions had burrowed into him. He tried staying sober for the tournament and noticed his play suffer. The sudden withdrawal from his usual vices left him disoriented, and after the Olympics, he slipped back into the partying lifestyle with a vengeance. He continued to accumulate records in Calgary, surpassing even Al MacInnis's scoring mark. But the team was struggling financially and couldn't afford his contract demands, so in 1999 he was traded to Colorado. It was a seismic moment for Flames fans, who felt like they'd lost their beloved heart and soul star. Fleury, for his part, thrived in Colorado for a moment. He notched tons of points, helped the Avalanche in the playoffs, and looked like a missing piece for a franchise vying for another championship. But the Avs ended up losing in the Western Conference Finals, and they opted not to re-sign him. He hit free agency in 1999 and landed an enormous deal with the New York Rangers, 3 years, $21 million, with an option for a fourth. It might have sounded like a dream, a big star in the world's biggest city. But for someone struggling with multiple addictions and emotional instability, Manhattan was arguably the worst place to hide. The city beckons with bright lights, constant action, and temptations at every corner. Fleury discovered an entire new playground for his destructive impulses, developing a fixation on gentlemen's clubs, where he could access every indulgence in one spot: booze, drugs, gambling, and more. On the ice, his performance wavered under the intense scrutiny of the New York media and the suffocating burden of being perceived as the savior of a franchise that desperately needed a star. After a slow first year, he entered the league's treatment program for substance abuse, hoping to claw his way back from the brink. For a while, it seemed like he was on track. He scored 30 goals in 2001 and earned an invite to his 7th NHL All-Star game. But the monster of addiction wasn't gone. It was merely waiting. At the tail end of that season, he left the team again to re-enter rehab, and rumors swirled about run-ins with the law, wild nights in clubs, and questionable relationships. The gossip pages ate it up. Wayne Gretzky, who was general manager for Team Canada at the 2002 Olympics in Salt Lake City, took a gamble by inviting Fleury to the selection camp. It was hugely controversial, given that Fleury's meltdowns had become public. Yet, Theo remained clean just long enough to earn a roster spot, and he contributed a pair of assists over 6 games as Canada won its first Olympic gold medal in men's hockey in 50 years. While that might have been the pinnacle of his hockey career, an Olympic gold to go with his Stanley Cup, his personal unraveling was waiting around the corner. Having stayed sober in the build-up to the Olympics, he slingshotted right back into the vices once the games were over. One addiction in particular, gambling, took hold in a massive way, reportedly costing him millions. The environment in New York facilitated a constant flood of temptations, and soon Fleury was lost in a maze of self-destruction again. After the 2001-02 season, the Rangers declined to pick up his contract option. They didn't want the trouble anymore, not even at a discount. Theo, still a name with some cachet, managed to get a 2-year, $8.5 million contract with the Chicago Blackhawks, which reunited him with coach Brian Sutter, whom he respected. But just before the season began, the NHL suspended him for violating the league's substance abuse policy. By the time he returned 2 months later, he was a ghost of the player he used to be. His quickness was fading, and mentally he was in a tailspin. There were also off-ice incidents, like the notorious brawl in a Columbus nightclub that left him bloody and humiliated. He finished that season playing 54 games, scoring 33 points, but the performance was overshadowed by the drama. In one final moment that said it all, he got hit in the cheekbone by an errant puck while nursing a hangover, his reflexes dulled by the lifestyle he couldn't break away from. He walked away from the Blackhawks, and effectively from the NHL, soon thereafter, not even bothering to tell the team formally. Within days of his self-imposed exit, he was suspended again by the league for failing to comply with rehab protocols. The NHL, for all intents and purposes, was done with Theo Fleury, and in truth, Theo was done with it too. He fled to New Mexico, drifting into a black hole of despair, wrestling with suicidal thoughts. The unthinkable end to what had once been such a glamorous and improbable success story was playing out like a tragedy. No one knew if he'd ever resurface. In 2005, seeking something, anything, to restore a sense of normalcy, he briefly joined the Horse Lake Thunder of the North Peace Hockey League, a senior-level outfit in Canada. It was a far cry from the bright lights of the NHL, but maybe, for a while, it was enough to keep him afloat. Then, on a friend's suggestion, he packed his bags and headed to Northern Ireland, signing with the Belfast Giants of the Elite Ice Hockey League for the 2005-06 season. For the Irish fans, the arrival of a former NHL star was like the biggest carnival coming to town. And for Theo, it was a much-needed reset. He poured his heart into the game again, scoring at a torrid pace, and was named league MVP. Yet the true victory was that, on September 18, 2005, in Belfast, he decided to become sober. He credited his second wife, Jennifer, for helping him find the strength. While that move didn't erase all the ghosts, it was a major turning point. Fleury mostly stayed away from pro hockey until 2009, when he staged a remarkable comeback attempt with the Calgary Flames at the age of 41. Fans got excited at the possibility of this beloved star returning to the Saddledome to close the circle on his extraordinary career. He took his training seriously, dropping weight, working with a trainer, and focusing on regaining some measure of the speed he once possessed. And in the exhibition games, he showed flashes of that old magic, racking up 4 points in 4 outings. Ultimately, he was released before the regular season started, but he said he felt an immense sense of closure. He had proven to himself he could still compete, and he got to say goodbye on his own terms. Shortly after, he announced his official retirement from hockey. The Flames never officially retired his number 14, though it's never been worn by another Calgary player. There's a fierce debate among fans about whether it should hang in the rafters beside the likes of Lanny McDonald, Joe Nowindick, Al MacInnis, Mike Vernon, and Jerome Iginla. On pure hockey merit, it's an argument many believe he's earned. Then again, with all his controversies and the complicated baggage of his off-ice life, maybe it's not so simple. That complexity only deepened when, in October 2009, Fleury released his autobiography, Playing with Fire. The title was almost too fitting, describing not just how he lived on the ice, but how he lived off it, always seconds away from going up in flames. The book was searingly honest, going into excruciating detail about his abuse at the hands of Graham James. He recounted how that trauma led him into a vortex of addictions, fueled by rage, shame, and despair. The book hit like a bomb across Canada, becoming the country's top-selling non-fiction title that month. People were horrified, stunned, and also moved that Theo had finally spoken publicly about the vile secrets that had haunted him for so long. Sheldon Kennedy, who had come forward years earlier to expose James, encouraged Fleury to file charges as well. In 2010, Theo did just that. Ultimately, Graham James pleaded guilty to abusing Fleury and Fleury's cousin, Todd Holt. Though James served more time, many felt the sentence was far too lenient for the gravity of his crimes. Playing with Fire was adapted into a one-man play, and HBO Canada produced a documentary on Fleury's life. Audiences were astonished by the rawness of his confessions. This wasn't a typical athlete biography that glosses over personal troubles. It was a scalding exposé of abuse, addiction, and survival, culminating in an attempt at redemption. In many ways, that's the only storyline that does Fleury's journey justice. He was a survivor, both on and off the rink. The same drive that let him flourish among players nearly a foot taller is the drive that kept him alive when everything else seemed determined to destroy him. Post-hockey, Fleury tried a little bit of everything. He dabbled in the concrete business. He joined Season 2 of Skating with the Stars. He wrote a second book. He launched a clothing line. He even ventured briefly into country music, taking a stab at a field that was miles from the brutal boards of an NHL arena. Through it all, he engaged in various charitable efforts, including the Breaking Free Foundation, which supports survivors of traumatic experiences. He's also an outspoken public speaker, known for tackling topics like abuse, recovery, and mental health with unfiltered honesty. More recently, he's courted controversy again with strong political statements. He's become a leading voice with Canadians for Truth, a conservative group highly critical of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, vaccine mandates, and other hot-button issues. Some fans feel disillusioned by his stance, while others applaud him for speaking his mind. Whatever your opinion, it's consistent with the portrait of a man who's always done things his own way. In terms of raw hockey statistics, Fleury's record is undeniable. Over 1,000 NHL regular season games, he posted 455 goals, 633 assists, and 1,088 points. In the playoffs, where the competition is at its fiercest, he was even more productive on a points-per-game basis. He was a key part of a Stanley Cup victory. He won an Olympic gold medal, participated in 7 NHL All-Star games, and overcame his supposed physical limitations with a performance level that few can match. And remember, he did all this in the dead puck era, when defenses were allowed to get away with far more obstruction, hooking, and holding. The fact that he still shredded defenses is extraordinary. And though he was battered by hits that would have flattened bigger men, he rarely missed games due to injuries. He was a testament to resiliency and sheer willpower. When it comes to the Hockey Hall of Fame, debate rages on. Based on numbers alone, Fleury seems like a strong candidate. But the Hall of Fame is a murky place where character, reputation, and intangible legacy also come into play. Some believe his personal troubles, controversies, and loud political statements might be keeping him out. Others say the Hall should honor on-ice contributions only and that Fleury's feats demand recognition. Theo himself has sometimes expressed indifference, suggesting he's already proud of the life he's reclaimed from the jaws of despair. Theo Fleury's story is one of triumph and tragedy, resilience and redemption. A Stanley Cup champion, an Olympic gold medalist, and one of the most electrifying players in NHL history, his impact on the game is undeniable. But will hockey's ultimate honor, the Hall of Fame, ever come calling? What do you think? Should Theo Fleury be inducted? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, check out our documentary on another hockey legend. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more incredible sports stories. Thanks for watching.